the spelling of the name.
Hee
I just want people to know that that wasn't me. Um, but it looks like Dylan.
Dylan, Dylan, Dylan.
Dylan. Who's on the show tonight? Dylan.
Dylan.
Maybe the greatest rapper of all time. Top 5. Who's your top 5? Dylan.
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 Dylan. And Dylan.
And Dylan.
Yep.
Let's go. Good evening, everyone. I'm your host, Jason Miles, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. Before we start, if you're new to the channel, please hit subscribe. Don't forget to hit like and that notification bell so you are alerted whenever we go live. We're constantly adding cross streams with other channels and adding new shows. Tomorrow, we'll be doing another episode of White Guy Wednesday. Then we'll be back Thursday with my play brother, Bertram Cooper, to discuss his latest piece in The Atlantic about the failures of affirmative action. Should be a great show. Can't wait to hear what you guys have to say if you've read his piece in The Atlantic already. Then we're going to end the week with our good friend Justin Hunt and ask the question, does hip-hop have a revolutionary capacity? We'll be going to the champagne room tonight. We want to hear how you guys feel about what we discussed in the first hour. So the phone lines will be open. We won't be in the champagne room too very long as my daughter's here. She came all the way from the U.S. to visit me here in Mexico. So we're going to have some dad-daughter time. So if you haven't done it yet, you have the means and you feel so inclined, become a patron for as little as $3 a month or $30 for the year. You can have access to champagne rooms past and present, be a part of the live discussion for the Mau Mau Hour with Pascal Robert, Pascal Rebel, and join us for our TIR movie nights. And this Friday, we will be doing a movie night. We'll be watching on the TIR Discord channel a movie that you cannot get. I repeat, you cannot get it on any streaming service. Pump up the volume and cross your fingers. If all goes well and my kid doesn't keep me up too late with the nonstop partying that she wants to do, which literally consists of us watching silly movies. I will have my piece out where I do actually talk about why I think Pump Up the Volume is such a current situation. We'll be watching that this Friday on the Discord channel. So excited. I think you guys will really dig that movie. For those of you that saw it back in the day and were like, oh, I really want to watch that. And then you find out the only way you can see it on DVD and you realize you didn't have a DVD player. Doesn't matter. We're going to be watching it this Friday in the TIR Discord. Movie night. I hope it's a good turnout. I'm excited. The last movie night, I believe, Toussaint picked. So speaking of Toussaint, let me bring in the faceless voice of reason. She is one, the only, the fabulous M. Tucson.
Hello. Firstly, I would like to say happy Father's Day.
Oh,
Jason
thank
Miles,
you.
as well as to our guest,
Our
Dylan
guest,
Rodriguez.
Dylan Rodriguez. I believe I wished him a happy Father's Day as well.
Yeah.
Toussaint is feeling fabulous. So if you hear a sassiness in her voice, I can vouch for this because I actually know her. She got her hair did.
I did.
It is just luxurious.
Mm-hmm.
She was walking around New York, just no good reason. Just, oh, excuse me, sorry.
Yeah. Oh, it's so
oh my
windy
goodness,
today.
excuse me. Oh, sorry. It's so windy. Oh my God.
Now it's hot. I'm gonna put my hair up. Now I'm cold. I'm gonna put my hair
Oh
down.
my God. Oh my God. Oh, it's in my face. Sorry.
Oh.
When you're fabulous, it gets in your face sometimes. So I do feel there's a little part of me. I was like, oh man, people really need to see this because she is killing it right now.
So funny. Steve said I got a silk press. He's right. That's exactly what it's called. Stevie knowing too much.
She was like, MT has been walking around New York City for the last 3 days like Diane Carroll circa 1973. So it's a beautiful thing. You guys can't see it. I'm expressing what I saw when I saw it.
Mm-hmm.
It was what movie has a hair moment like that? I don't even think there is a movie.
Wait, what's that movie with Sandra Bullock?
Sandra Bullock. Speed.
Geniality?
Oh.
Just Speed 2. The worst.
I don't know. Didn't Sandra Bullock buy a black kid? Does she still have that kid?
I think she does. I think she actually cares about the kid.
Okay.
Well, unless she's just a really good actress. I don't know. Hard to know with them.
My daughter has me watching this docu-series on... You ever seen that movie, The Orphan? Of course you've never seen it because you haven't seen any movies. You remember a movie called The Orphan?
Vaguely. Is it horror?
I'm sorry, what was that? I can't hear through all the New York accent. What would you say?
Is it a horror movie? How would you say it? Horror?
Horror. It's a horror film. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a horror. Well, yes, it's like a suspense horror film where this family adopts what they think is a small child, and she ends up being like a grown woman and a weird murderer. And I guess that was loosely based on some story. I don't know, but we're trying to watch it, and the whole thing is insane. And my daughter yells at the screen more than me, and I realize that I created that monster. So I'm apologizing now to all of the people that have to watch movies with me and her. Talking shit to the screen. Well, speaking of talking shit to the screen, let's bring in our guest. On June 12th, 1898, the Philippines gained their independence from the colonial government of Spain with help from the United States. The people of the Philippines were under the impression that after getting their independence from Spain, they would become a sovereign nation. That didn't happen. They fell under U.S. colonial rule until 1946. Today, we're joined by Professor Dylan Rodriguez to discuss the brutal struggle for Philippine independence. Please welcome friend of show, long time. Yes, Dylan was one of the first. I think Dylan was a guest before Pascal was even a co-host. That's how far back he goes. Please welcome Professor of UC Riverside, Dylan Rodriguez. Not today, colonizer. That's what MT says as she flicks her hair.
For our audio listeners, that is what Dylan's shirt says today. Not today, colonizer.
Oh,
or ever.
Or ever.
we should say for the audio listeners, because I forget sometimes that we do an audio show. That is quite popular.
I was saying I can't even be mad that you fucked up the spelling of my first name because you mispronounced Pascal's last name like 5 minutes ago. So I'm all right.
And I've been pronouncing it for the last.
I'm not nearly as hurt as I was 15 minutes ago.
So. I saw. So you know it sucks. I saw that on.
Sure, you did.
Yeah. The invite. I was like, "Fuck." So
details, host, details.
If you look,
I thought you were professional and shit.
Yeah.
Actually, I should have known you weren't. You invite my ass on here. Obviously, you're very unprofessional.
TIR is a very large operation, and there's certain things that have been pulled from me, and they have been violently pulled from me. It was one of those coups, like that movie with Tom Hanks, where the African dude goes, "I am the captain now." That's what Jean Bajwa did with the thumbnails. Look at me. Look at me. That's literally what happens if I ever create one, because I cut clips. I know Gene is busy, like yourself. He's a professor, department head, and he'll come in and erase whatever I did. And I'm like, okay, all right, well, I get it. This is not my lane anymore. So I have to very nicely go, excuse, Jason gave me the wrong spelling. You kiss Gene Bajwa in the comments trying to protect his ass.
See?
He's lying. He's lying. Is this the biggest Kurdish lie I ever heard in my life? Somebody in the comments said Jason got January 6th. That's how it felt, man. But Dylan, let's get serious. Dylan, thank you for joining us today. For those watching, we originally wanted to do this show closer to Philippine Independence Day. However, scheduling conflicts prevented us from making that happen. But it's happening now, and that's all that matters. But seriously, Dylan. But now, you know what sucks, Dylan? Every time I look at your name, all I see is Dylan.
we can go with that. That won't be the first or last time. Thank you, Dave Chappelle.
My oldest son's middle name is Dylan, and the reason why his middle name is Dylan is because of that effing guy. His mom was like, I think his middle name should be Dylan. I was like, I hate that dude.
You start the show off.
I guess a good way to start the show off, top 20 shows in the music category on Apple Podcasts. Would you believe that?
No shit.
Yeah.
Damn.
It's funny. Dylan, can you tell us a bit about the U.S. motivation to ally with the Philippines in the Spanish-American War?
I will in a minute, but first, Let me start with something.
Yeah.
I'm asking y'all to put that link up that I sent you a minute ago.
Okay.
So I want to give a shout out to somebody that we need to get free, who's locked up in the Philippines. I believe in a prison camp called Bagong Diwa, which I wrote a short article about it like almost 20 years ago now, after there was a prison massacre there by state officials. But just a shout out to Michael Amuchi and his cousin, who invited me on board to try to help support his case. But Michael Amuchi is a Nigerian immigrant. He worked at a call center. And bottom line is this. I'll give you all the short version. He's been incarcerated in the Philippines at Camp Bagong Diwa for 5 years or so, maybe a little more than 5 years, without a conviction. He has not been convicted of a crime. He is one of the 2 Black people, meaning people of African descent, who were being held captive at Bagong Diwa. It's a notorious place. So like I said, back in December, I was brought on board by his cousin. I was invited by his cousin to help support his case. I want to ask your audience to join me in doing that. If you bear with me, I want to just read a short biographical kind of account by Michael himself, rather than try to summarize it for you. This is what Michael wrote. This is a few months ago he wrote this. He says, quote, "My agony started on July 28, 2018, when I came back from work and was resting in my apartment, and a group of 4 men barged into my house, and then without discussion, put drugs in my office bag and accused me of selling illegal drugs and took me away. July 30, 2018, I got inquested in the court, and my legal counsel filed a petition for bail because there was no grounds to keep me behind bars. To my sadness, my bail petition was denied by the court in February 2020. Since then, I've been going to court every couple months, fighting for the court to acquit, dismiss my case, and set me free. This is now my 5th year behind bars, unjustly suffering from something I did not commit. I'm being unlawfully detained for something that I never committed. Yet I keep waiting for 3 to 6 months for a hearing, and at the end of each hearing, my case is reset again. A lot of other inmates in here with the same case as me have been set free. My case keeps dragging on for a long period of time. Imagine that there are only 2 inmates, including myself here, now on my floor, and we're the oldest in here. This makes me sad because the question they always ask me is, if I have an attorney, why is my case reset the most time? This is another short thing from his cousin who's been doggedly and consistently supporting the case, and has been. I'm very grateful that I've been able to participate in a very small way to support this situation. But they write the following: the Philippine criminal legal system, Supreme Court of the Philippines, Judge Rosario Angelito S. David, Prosecutor Rowena Malabanan Galeon, Office of the City Prosecutor, Santa Rosa City, Camp Bagong Diwa, are all now trying to kill my cousin, Michael Amuchi, and kill his spirits. But we cannot and will not let this happen. They will not succeed. They will drop all of his charges and release him so we can go back home to our village, meaning in Nigeria, and receive the love, healing, and care he deserves and needs. Michael Amuchi will not linger in a cage to deal with more terror, violence, and abuse. He will be free. So I just ask folks in the audience, if you can go, if you're on the YouTube, great. If you're on the podcast, on the audio podcast, go to the YouTube, click those. There's a couple links. One is very simple. I created a petition that it's very time sensitive. If you could click on it now that you've heard me talk about it, if you're willing to support, just throw your signature on there. This stuff actually makes a difference, y'all. This is not, it's not like many US-based petitions like change.org, et cetera, that you always kind of wonder if they just disappear into the ether. I can tell you from firsthand experience and secondhand accounts that if you have a significantly circulated, globally signed petition supporting somebody, that Philippine state officials, I should watch what I say. Philippine state officials will read it. I'll kind of stop right there. But I ask people to support that. And there's also a fundraiser if anybody can spare $1 or $2. I just, shit, man, if people want to match me, I just donated $250 earlier today because I felt bad because I've been kind of off this case for a few months. And thankfully, Michael's cousin pulled me right back into it earlier today. So anyway, I thought it was a great timing to be pulled back to supporting Michael Amuchi because, number one, because his hearing's coming up. Number two, because I knew I was coming on your show and that we're talking about this thing we call Philippines Independence Day. I thought this was an appropriate thing to kind of start the show with. You know, think about the anti-blackness of the war on drugs and Duterte and all the rest of this as one of the ongoing legacies of the so-called absurdity, this Philippine independence absurdity.
And if you guys can't donate for whatever reason, please share that link on all your social media. Let's get the word out. I do want to ask you this question real quick before we pivot back to the discussion about Philippine sovereignty, if you will. What would be the motivation to even try to plant drugs on someone like that?
Well, number one, he's a black immigrant. Mm-hmm. Right. So it's to kind of ask, well, what is the motivation behind the police and carceral violence of racial domestic war and anti-black domestic war in particular? Mm-hmm. Which is to say, you kind of answer your own question by describing the condition, right? In other words, there doesn't have to be a kind of ulterior motive. I think it's the execution of this violence in and of itself that is already both the cause and the consequence. You know, I think we're always looking for a causality. We're always looking for some kind of rational explanation. Mm-hmm. What we need to do is kind of fuck with our notion of what counts as rational, right? Go from the rational to what is the rationale.
Well, I just asked the question because, you know, is it one of those, did he piss somebody off at work? And they were like, I'll show you. I think it's a circumstance of being black in the Philippines. Really? I do. I mean, just because having Nigerian, like that's hard for me to hear because I have too many people that I know personally. As you know, I'm
Yeah.
have all these beige children. And the Philippines has never been a place they've told me not to go to.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean. And also my wife's aunt. The reason why her family is even in the States is because her aunt married a black soldier that stayed there for years and then brought the family over when they moved to the States.
Yeah.
So, and I've, you know, and it's all anecdotal. I don't have numbers, right? So I don't know if it's an American, are Black Americans treated different than Nigerians? Are Nigerians there as domestic help? Because, you
He
know,
worked in a call center.
that's what I'm saying. Like,
Yeah.
you know, Filipinos, as you know,
Yeah.
better than myself, the export of their labor is a big part of the GDP. So is it where Nigeria is in a more precarious situation? So the Philippines are like, well, let's bring some Nigerians in to help with this work that we don't want to do.
I mean, that's the political economy is all in there. But my thing is that Duterte's a motherfucker.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Like, I mean, that
you get no argument from me.
Yeah, I mean, the stuff, the kinds of state and state adjacent violence that the Duterte administration and that Rodrigo Duterte himself activated and continue to activate in the aftermath of his presidency, now during the Bongbong Marcos period. And again, I'm no expert on Philippine politics. I follow it because it's like, you know, my blood is there and stuff, right? My loved ones, my blood is there and so forth and so on. But the kind of violence that particular administration activated is, I would say it would be almost unfathomable if you and I weren't living in the United States during this period of time, in which case I think it should be entirely fathomable. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, and it's not to draw easy comparisons and parallels. I'm not trying to say that.
Yeah.
You know,
but
it is to say that the case of Michael Amuchi is in many ways the logical expression of what Duterte activated. You know, it's just that, but we don't hear about it that much. You know, and I think we need to. Like, you go on the internet, like, there's not that much about Michael Amuchi's case. Like, maybe one or two articles.
I've never heard the name until you uttered it before we went
on. Look, it's his cousin, and I'm not going to say their name because I don't know if they want their name out there. But it's their cousin that sent me an email like back in probably November of 2022 and said, and I think they just found my name because I'd written a short article about the prison camp where Michael is being incarcerated. Like, this is, I think, 2005. I wrote this piece because there was a massacre there by the state, right? So I think they found my name that way and contacted me, and then they invited me to participate. There was a kind of day where a bunch of people convened online, and we called the you know, the jail officials and then some of the judicial administrators to just say, look, you know, here's my name, here's where I'm at. I'm paying attention to this case. Please pass this on to the judge. And they said they did. It's about fucking time they released Michael. It's about time. So like, I just ask people to just offer something on that. Like just even if just your name, like offer your name, please. But this is why this thing, Philippine independence, it's like, how can you claim this thing called independence when the regime of the state that carries that a kind of badge of self-determination or whatever you want to call it, really modernity, when it's a kind of refracting of, you know, the kind of anti-Black carceral domestic war making genocidal proto-genocidal protocols, right? The normalcies of its colonial power. So
let's talk about we don't have to get deep into the Spanish occupation for I forget how many centuries they were there.
333.
Yeah, there you go.
Sorry, something kind of made me look sideways. But why does the U.S. want to be involved with the Philippines in the first place and help them get independence from Spain?
All right, so like, I reject the premise of the latter part of your question. So we'll go back to that.
They don't want Spain. They don't want the Philippines to be independent from Spain.
That's not really what they want. Nah.
Okay.
It's not really what they want.
So they want them to be dependent on Spain.
No. So Spain is collateral damage.
I mean,
like
I would
in other words, the nominal end of the Spanish colonial dominance
Mhm.
is collateral damage for the trans-Pacific migration of U.S. conquest, which is really what 1898 was.
Sure.
It trans-Pacific, but also into the Caribbean, because it was the Philippines and it was Puerto Rico, right? And
Guam,
Puerto Rico's
Cuba.
a so-called Commonwealth. It's an actual, it's
Yeah.
basically a colony.
Yeah.
And the Philippines is now a neo-colony. But like at that time, and this is the June 12th thing, right? The June 12th thing is the declaration. It's Philippine independence from Spanish colonialism, right? So I think the kind of dominant story, the dominant national story, is June 12th, right? That's the Philippine National Independence Day. And then there's a second Independence Day,
You're talking about
which-
June 12th, 1898.
1898. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And so the second Independence Day is
June 4th, 1946.
July 4th.
July 4th.
1946.
Sorry.
July 4th, 1946. Right. And that's when essentially, and this is the words that the US government and the Philippine government in kind of concert, this is the word they used. It's when the Philippines was emancipated.
Mhm.
Right. They use the words of emancipated, right? Which is why the word emancipation is an important one, right? It carries a lot of different historical contradictions within its terms. It's not as simple as our high school teachers or whatever. No, I shouldn't say high school teachers, as propagandists and kind of American patriots would want us to think that emancipation is this kind of definitive final release of servitude, which emancipation means that something has been granted by a dominant power, by an owner, by a master. And so there's two Independence Days. So that's why when you first invited me and I couldn't make it because of scheduling, I said, well, you know what? I don't even know what the fuck you're talking about, because there's no like what Independence Days. And then we were going back and forth about how, okay, there's June 12th, there's July 4th. So we're kind of meeting in the middle and somewhere in between that.
Yeah.
Which makes sense. So, but to
It's
get
an
back,
excuse for me to talk about the history and have
Yeah.
some attention around it, because as much as people say they like to see and hear history shows, sadly, the history shows we do, regardless of who's on, don't do the numbers of the drama shows. So we still said, F it, we're going to do this show because I personally think it's an important history. It definitely means a lot to me personally. But 1898, Philippines gained their independence from Spain, but now they're under U.S. colonial rule.
yeah.
What
I mean,
then
almost
happened?
very quickly,
Very
right?
quickly.
So the way the story goes, and this is where things get complicated, right? This is where the kind of the simple narratives don't totally make sense, because on the one hand, they call it the Spanish-American War. I mean, that shit was barely a war. It was more of a diplomatic kind of negotiation. There was an almost ceremonial exchange of gunfire, in and near Manila, to kind of give it the face of a war. But it was basically a negotiation between the U.S. and Spain, right? And this is the U.S. kind of at the cusp of its global
And Spain
imperial.
is at the end of their
man.
empire as well. Like, let's
Yup.
admit, the
And
only reason why the U.S. was able to get these kind of valuable territories, because the Philippines is finally an entryway into the vast market that is China at this time.
Thank you. So we got that, and then at the same time, think about what is animating a U.S. national narrative at the time, right? And on the one hand, it's still reeling from what I think is an almost unfathomable degree of internecine white on white warfare in the Civil War, right? Like the degrees of just brutality, like white on white brutality and death that came out of that is like, of course, it's a tiny fraction of what other forms of U.S. state violence have done, right? It's a fraction of that, right? But in terms of the normalized white supremacist U.S. national narrative, it's still reeling from that. It's still reeling from this. It's still, it's in the middle of the kind of ongoing attempt to resuture the Confederacy fully back into the so-called Union. And at the same time, if you look at what's happened in the North American continent at that point, the Manifest Destiny mandate has reached a certain kind of imagined territorial horizon on the West Coast, and is now seeking other venues to continue. So this is, you know, from Teddy Roosevelt to McKinley and others, going across the Pacific and finding another.
And Roosevelt took veterans from the very bloody,
yes,
very, very bloody Indian Wars, which, you know, so they go in there and they massacre large segments of the populations. And I have a quote here from Mark Twain I wanted to read to you, and maybe you know this quote, because I did want to talk a bit about what you're talking about, these public debates that are happening about U.S. expansion. And Mark Twain was very, very anti the empire building. You know, he once said in one of these debates that he felt that the American flag, if they keep trying to expand the empire westward, should be not stars and stripes, but, you know, red for the blood that they're spilling, and a skull and crossbones to replace the stars. So Twain says, who are the oppressors? The few, the king, the capitalist, and a handful of other overseers and superintendents. Who are the oppressed? The many, the nations of the earth, the valuable personages, the workers. They that make the bread that the soft-handed and idle eat. Is Twain remembered in the Philippines for his opposition to this war?
I mean, yes, but who gives a fuck? Fuck Mark Twain.
Okay.
Who gives a shit about Mark Twain? He didn't pick up a fucking gun and fight the U.S. occupier or the Spanish. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, you get what I'm saying? There's a certain way that Mark Twain, and this happens all the time with great white artists.
Mm-hmm.
There's a kind of narrative of exception to the ones who have the backbone to actually speak up against, you know, the hegemonic condition and narrative at the time, which is cool. Like, give him his flowers and all that, you know? But what I think is much more significant, especially for the precious time and the privilege of sharing, you know, our audience here to understand, is that 1898 was the beginning of a genocidal conquest, right? So, like, Mark Twain is not wrong, but he's also woefully inadequate in his understanding and comprehension of what was actually going down, right? Like I think he got a taste of it. I mean, it's no different than what the way some of the most well-meaning, prominent white artists and spokespeople and others would talk about everything from the occupation in Iraq to the war in Vietnam. They get a taste of the horror. You know, they get a glimpse of it, and they go, which is cool.
I mean, you can say that about anybody, though. Malcolm X never picked up a gun to fight somebody in a war.
Yeah, but he was on the side of those who did, overtly and explicitly.
Oh, but that's saying a lot. You're giving a lot of credit to a guy that did the same thing as Mark Twain.
I would not compare Malcolm X to Mark Twain.
Okay.
Yeah. No, because Malcolm X also traveled and was among
he still didn't travel and then go fight in any freedom struggles.
Yo, the fight takes many forms. Right?
Okay.
Like, and I'm saying he was directly involved.
It takes a rhetorical form.
You don't. Hey, wait a second. You don't think rhetoric is central to warfare?
I mean, you just said Mark Twain doesn't mean anything because he never picked up a gun.
I'm saying, in addition to that, you know, he's one prominent white artist. Look, I didn't know that you love Mark Twain that much.
I'll
take it back if you want. I'll take it back if you want.
I respect Mark Twain. You can't.
I just don't know why we're talking about him. I respect Mark Twain. I like Mark Twain shit. I don't know why we're talking about him when
it's a prominent figure.
Yeah. Okay.
You know,
I got you. Yeah.
If you want to pull up, I don't remember every Filipino name that I read about when I was writing about this 4 years ago.
Yeah.
If you want to pull up some quotes from them, that's dope. Someone says Jason loves to protect white folks. That's really interesting.
Ooh, that's fuck. Okay, I didn't mean to open that one up.
Yeah, I didn't know that. You know, look, anybody can say anything, and it's like, okay, just because someone said that doesn't mean I have to agree with it.
Of course.
I just feel that.
Look. It's also there's also something.
It was a very large stage. You know, these were congressional debates, and you know that at the time.
Yeah.
I'm not. The people that are commenting, I don't even think they understand to the magnitude that they were having these debates in the U.S. because we don't see these anymore.
Oh, you
have to agree.
Like, you can go to the library and see. I mean, fuck the library. You can go on the computer. You can go on your computer and like pull that stuff up in the congressional records. It's all like been digitized at this point. Like if you can get access to that, if you can bump somebody's university credentials or something, like you can see the debates. You can like read the debates going back and forth. Like so yeah, Twain was in there. There was other folks in there as well.
Mhm.
What was more interesting to me was some of the correspondence, and there's a whole like kind of subfield of historians that have compiled the letters that went back and forth between African American soldiers, Black American soldiers that were part of the occupation, the U.S. occupation in the Philippines, that were writing back home, and were writing kind of what you might anticipate they would write, which was, severe internal conflict and antagonism about what they had been enlisted to do.
But these were the same Black soldiers that were part of the Buffalo Soldiers that were massacring natives as well.
Some were and some weren't, but I'm saying like they carried that shit with them, right? So for a lot of these soldiers, this was not a kind of vindicating, assimilation into the, the U.S. national narrative. It was actually something that increasing for many of them instantly, for others increasingly, kind of echoed what they understood to be the emerging Jim Crow apparatus, apartheid, basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's part of this as well. But then part of what goes down too, and from 1899 onward, is that it's not colonialism in a kind of instantaneous way, right? There has to be an extended period of conquest. So there's about, like, depending on who you read and like how you categorize it, the term conquest, how to categorize and think about the term conquest, it goes on for anywhere from 5 to 12 years, right? So that's why I whipped out the book I wrote about this. There's a chapter I wrote about that period. There it is. You don't have to read it. I just wanted to say that I actually.
No, it's important that there's actually, important that there's scholarship on this period of time, because it's
right.
You made a point about a Wikipedia search, but it really doesn't get into the weeds.
No, it doesn't. And this is the point, right? Like, I can't even remember what fucking chapter it was, man.
What's the title of it?
Oh, it's called. Wait, where am I here? Oh, chapter 3. So it's called Suspended Apocalypse: White Supremacy, Genocide, and the Filipino Condition. Shameless plug for my own fucking book. That's corny as hell. Sorry I did that. That's embarrassing that I just did that. But the point being is that the third chapter in this book is where I followed the lead of a very small number of writers, including historians, who identified the U.S. conquest in the Philippines at the turn of the 20th century, 1899 to around 1910, 1912, as a genocidal conquest. And that's the fight you will have with many Philippine studies and Filipino scholars, historians, and others, right? Not to mention ordinary everyday folks. There is not a common sense, number one, that the U.S. engaged in an actual extended conquest, and number two, that it was genocidal. And what I want people to understand is that when I say it was a genocidal conquest, this is before the era, of anything approaching weapons of mass destruction. All right. So like, if you go, again, same historical, you can go look at the congressional records there, go online, read the accounts of what the U.S. military and soldiers were doing to neutralize resistance to the U.S. occupation during that time. Yeah. Right. It's like almost indescribable levels of hand-to-hand intensified. I'm like burning villages, knowing that there were babies
raising
and elders, right?
And like it's all documented in the letters as well back.
Yes.
Which I forget where you can find them. I found a lot of those letters, which were pretty hard to read.
Yes,
because it's firsthand accounts.
Yeah,
I won't even get into even though we do drop the N-word quite a bit in this show. We're trying to be free of it in the first hour. They do drop it a lot.
Yeah,
in reference to Filipino people calling them the yellow ends, and
that's where gook started. The term gook. Sorry, I shouldn't say.
Oh, it starts in the Philippines.
Really? That was where that word originated. Was that because they were making fun of how people, of the not just Tagalog, but the other dialects and languages. That's how American soldiers would caricature the way they talk. Right? Would be that's where that term comes from. It was a term of genocide. Gook is a term of genocide not only because of Vietnam, but prior to that, because of the Philippines, because of the conquest of the Philippines.
I mean, I also learned.
Yeah.
That's how white people learn how to, or Americans learn how to fight different. Because if you remember, at the turn of the century, everyone's fighting like this. But in the Philippines,
well, I mean, you got to remember the Filipino, like Philippine resistance. I shouldn't like the people of the archipelago, right? Not all of who identify as Filipino, right? So the people of the archipelago are serious when they get engaged in resistance.
They were
Like they're
taking away. Isn't that a lot to do with like taking away the knives? That's why spoons and
no doubt,
forks
no
are
doubt.
used.
I mean, remember, like the specter that haunted Spain for 300 plus years was Magellan's head on a stake,
Mhm.
right? And for that matter, probably carried into the U.S. too. And then in many military history accounts, the U.S. resistance the Philippine resistance to U.S. occupation during that turn of the century period was one of the first identifiable, and successful forms of what came to be known as guerrilla warfare, right? And although guerrilla warfare also in the Philippine archipelago preceded the U.S. occupation, right? Because there's guerrilla warfare going on against Spain as well. So,
20 years
yeah.
before even the Spanish-American War happened, there's a massive uprising.
Yeah, so like part of what we need to understand about the resistance to the U.S. occupation, which was a genocidal occupation, is that you have actually a pretty highly effective guerrilla warfare as well. So it's like two things can be true, right? Is the U.S. can be engaged in a brutal, unapologetic genocidal war, which is in direct continuity with the genocidal wars against Native peoples in North America, right? So like what they've taken on is like another round of genocidal conquest, land conquest, displacement, cultural genocide, physiological, biological genocide, etc., against another group of indigenous Aboriginal peoples and mestizos, right, and petty bourgeoisie, but especially attacking Aboriginal indigenous peoples in the Philippine archipelago. And you have highly effective forms of guerrilla warfare happening that have continued into the present, right? And so we need to understand that the resistance, guerrilla warfare in particular, is an ongoing thing. It's an ongoing history, and it's waged both against the U.S. occupation, the U.S. neo-colonial government and military occupation, and against the Philippine nation state. You have multiple, groups. I'll just call them groups, collectives, communities, parties, peoples who are engage in protracted guerrilla war against the very existence of the nation state itself. So this is why the Philippine independence thing is so fucked up, right? It's a kind of an external imposition of political modernity onto a really complicated group of many peoples among these thousands of islands, most of whom want nothing the fuck to do with political modernity in the West. They want nothing to do with a nation state. They want nothing to do with the thing we call the Philippines, right? And arguably to the present day, it remains the case, despite the kind of narratives of Philippine independence that get kind of like shoved down, everyone's throats, right? I was gonna say our throats. I don't know who our is here, but yeah. I mean, so there's a kind of attempt to put a bow on all this shit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that you have colonization, then independence, and then colonization, then emancipation, then independence, and shit is way messier than that. So yeah, that's a kind of the beginning of a counter narrative. But I just wanted to really emphasize the fact that the point of origin, that's the whole thesis of my book in most ways, is to argue that the point of origin of the Philippines and the United States, or the so-called Filipino-American relation and contact, and for that matter, identity, is its origins are in a kind of in underclaimed and under-recognized and misrecognized genocide. And part of what I'm trying to think about is what it does to the projects of Filipino-American anything. If it's understood to have its origins in that kind of in that form of contact, if you want to call it contact.
Well, Tucson, I know you have a follow-up question that actually
I do.
Leads into the Philippines, because it wasn't just the U.S. that spent some time over there occupying as well. Japan
did as well. Can you tell us
on Death March? Yeah,
a little bit about the occupation of the Philippines by Japan?
Yeah, that's another. Yeah. So Japan tried to occupy the Philippines during World War II. Arguably they kind of did. Mm-hmm. And then for strategic reasons, that's another instance in which the Philippine military and the U.S. military ostensibly fought side by side to expel, the Japanese forces. So it was a kind of fleeting attempt. It was never an actual colony. All right, it was an attempted. I would generally refer to it as an attempted occupation, which was, means that if any attempt at occupation tends to be necessarily pretty intensely violent.
Mhm.
I mean, do you
So
want to
what's
get into the Bataan Death March a little bit?
yeah, I mean, Bataan Death March is one of the most well-known instances of like of in the kind of Philippine national narrative of a kind of national suffering, a kind of national moment of suffering that then it gets vindicated by both Filipino resistance, but importantly, a Philippine-U.S. partnership.
Mhm.
You know, and of course, the reason that the U.S. is engaged with this is, number one, obviously they don't want the Philippines to fall under the control of a competing imperial nation,
Mhm.
but also at this point, you know, you're talking about the cusp of the Cold War. The U.S. now understands the Philippine archipelago as a crucial site for establishing bases in proximity to the Soviet Union and Southeast Asia. So the U.S. wants to sustain and kind of invigorate its own military occupation, not to mention its neo-colonial political economic dominance over the Philippines.
And what of the class makeup during this time? Because also too, the U.S. is coming in hard. McKinley has this vision of what he thinks the Philippines can be, and I know one of the big things they're trying to do is re-educate the Filipino people into a more quote U.S. democracy, because McKinley felt, you know, this is per his letters,
Yeah.
that if they left the Philippines alone, they would have just turned into an anarchistic nightmare and been taken over by possibly Germany.
I mean, there's something deep that goes down with all that in that extended moment where the argument against any form of Philippine political autonomy, right? Even a moderated and kind of paternally regulated autonomy, meaning paternally by the United States, is the famous phrase that Filipinos are incapable of self-government. You know, that kind of that famous, you know, it's an anti-indigenous phrase. It's a eugenic concept. It's obviously a deeply white supremacist and racist concept. It's also got direct lineages with how the U.S. is dealing with Black people. So it's got anti-Blackness at its core. But this notion of being capable of self-government becomes the rhetorical declaration of protracted war of occupation, colonization in the Philippines, right? So in other words, we were arguing about Mark Twain, right? And I was saying like rhetoric is war. So like to pronounce that a people, and in this case, even the naming of the people's fucked up, right? Like I said a few minutes ago. But to pronounce a people incapable of self-government is then to already subject them to your domination, right? It's actually your responsibility to do this. In fact, it might even be your responsibility to eliminate a bunch of them, right? Because they're so incapable of self-government that they're a danger to themselves. We need to get rid of the most dangerous, the insurrectos in particular, you know, the Muslims in particular. And so, on the other side of that whole thing, in terms of addressing the class, both the class differences and the class antagonisms that you see and experience in the Philippines, and also which are totally transnational as well, is you see this among the petty bourgeoisie. So I'm talking about people of my class background, right? I'm like, you know, I'm open about this all the time. Like my parents are petty bourgeoisie. My dad was valedictorian of his class in college. My mom was a public school administrator and teacher for 4 years.
Your dad went to Yale.
No, yeah, you wish you did. You wish you did. Yeah. No, he got his. My mom got her degree from University of Hawaii. That was their first migration was Hawaii. And then my dad got his PhD from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in New Jersey. That's where I was born.
That sounds like a fancy school.
I don't know, man. It's New Jersey. How fancy can that get? You know what I mean? I love New Jersey, by the way. I don't even like fancy.
We have to also
have
to remind people that Dylan is not your typical California Filipino.
I'm not a California Filipino. Fuck, I'm not. I'm just not. What do you mean typical? I'm just not a California Filipino. I love my California Filipinos. I'm not
too late. Too late. You already called him out. Too late.
I just don't like. Look, I just don't like being misidentified. I'd rather you call me Dila. I'd rather you spell my name than misidentify me as a California Filipino. And like, I think California Filipinos would say the same. They'd probably want me to, you know, be over there.
They want you to break dance.
Dylan knows what real pizza is. That's what he's trying to say.
I know what real pizza. I know what a crab cake is.
Look at that.
And
How
I know
about
what a
bagels?
bagel. I know what a bagel
Yes,
is. Thank you.
bagels.
Thank you.
Very
Thank you.
important.
Dylan
on.
takes
Right on.
pizza very seriously, and he doesn't understand why people in Riverside don't take pizza as seriously as him.
I mean,
It's
I
very
think
important.
people in Riverside would generally admit that
Oh yeah.
if they're honest with themselves.
Oh, I will drive up to Riverside with you tomorrow. We could take a goddamn survey.
Hey, you're on. You're on. You're on. I'd like to see that. First of all, I would like just me and you hanging out on the street in Riverside to happen because I'm just really curious how people would take us. Because
In
we start
Riverside?
arguing and snapping.
By the
People,
school?
you know
By
what?
the school?
People would think we were a couple. Going back and forth, arguing and snapping at each other and like talking about Mark Twain and why you got to bring up white people all the time.
Yelling.
Like, oh,
I
that's
haven't
a
been to
dysfunctional
Riverside
couple over there.
in 5 years. I used to dig playing down there, but I haven't been to Riverside in like 5 years.
Shit.
But
Shit.
no, we
No.
can seriously make that happen because I got to go up north anyway for some other stuff.
Well,
so
we need to take care of business, but okay. In terms of the class antagonisms, right? Because you were talking about this a second ago. You're talking about class, the class. This is another crucial part of this story around Philippine independence. That Philippine independence is a kind of vanity of the petty bourgeoisie of the the petty bourgeois. It's a vanity. And my mom always likes to claim that we have a familiar relation to Emilio Aguinaldo, who's like the first president and all that. I mean, he was the president that declared independence and all that. So I don't know.
Is he picked by the American people or by his own people, or is it?
I mean,
I thought he was the leader of the resistance. No.
Yeah, he was, but the way that the story goes is that the U.S. ends up taking him captive,
Right.
and then he ends up kind of making some conciliations, and kind of the insurgency and resistance goes on without him in a certain kind of way, right? Like I think he was trying to avoid basically being executed. So there's one story that valorizes him as a kind of patriotic hero. Another one that thinks about him as a sellout. A sellout to the. Just depends who you talk to. You know what I'm saying? But but that's what I'm saying is that this whole Philippine independence thing is it's a certain type of story. It's a certain type of story that allows people to make sense of what's going on, because otherwise the narratives are so complicated that it's unsettling, which is how it should be. When you're talking about what the United States did and does in its ongoing occupation and dominance over the Philippine archipelago, it's not a happy story. And it's also the source of a lot of antagonism and resistance if you bring that shit up.
Really?
Oh man, like
with an older crowd.
Yo, let me tell you this. This is what I meant to tell you today.
Yeah.
Y'all should, anyone listening or watching this, look up any Philippine consulate, right? They're all over the globe, obviously, right? There's Philippine consulates all over the globe. Almost everyone has a tab called like about, and there'll be a tab called about the Philippines, right? Find how many of them mention or even imply that the Philippines was a U.S. colony.
Really?
Fine. Look, I did this before Gump coming on the show. I found one that kind of mentioned it. The DC consulate. The DC consulate was the only one that explicitly said anything. However, listen to how it was phrased. I even quoted this. This is from the Philippine consulate in Washington, D.C. Quote, in 1898, the Philippines became the first and only colony of the United States. Boom, boom, right? That was the first consulate I found that actually said that. However, listen to the next sentence. Quote, following the Philippine-American War, got me, right? Following the Philippine-American War, the United States brought widespread education to the islands.
Okay.
So the Philippine, see what I'm saying? So it's seen, it is articulated by a certain class stratum, and certainly by a Philippine kind of state narrative as what has in kind of absurd terms been named a benevolent colonialism, which is a mind-numbing contradiction of terms, but one which I think the Philippine national narrative celebrates and valorizes in ways that become common sense. And I also dare say that I don't know that the Philippines is unique in this. I think it might be kind of paradigmatic in terms of the absurdity of talking about a benevolent colonizer. But I think in this day and age, I think it's increasingly less uncommon that people who are inheritors and survivors, or even descendants of certain colonial places, will think about the colonizers somehow being, overall maybe okay. Like maybe what they did was okay. They modernized us. They brought us Christianity. They did,
which
this,
they were
did
already
that.
Christian before.
Yeah, they brought us capitalism, right? You know what I mean? They brought
Which was
us
also kind of a
capitalism.
point of contention with the population that was there. McKinley, constantly talked about God and trying to help these people, and his letters, which are actually extremely public, I would suggest people go read if you want to get a perspective on. He was pretty open about his motivation. There is no hiding, U.S. motivation to get into the Philippines to sell stuff, literally.
Yeah.
And not really caring about how they go about doing it, how they're going to colonize the people through education, and even talks of the class makeup.
Yeah. I mean, this is what fucks me up about, like, early on in my Africana studies education, I read Miseducation of the Negro by Carter G. Woodson, which is, I think, a classic text. I mean, shit, this audience knows who Carter G. Woodson is. But then it made me fucking sad. Like, as I learned as my studies continued, and I learned how central a role Carter G. Woodson played in the U.S. colonial project in the Philippines. So it's like, again, it's one of those two things are true situations where, on the one hand, much of what he writes in Miseducation of the Negro comes directly out of the shit he saw happening in the Philippines. And at the very same time, I think he was a willing and, I think, really enthusiastic and committed participant in that kind of civil society component of colonization. The project of modernity, like the whole kind of project of creating public schooling. That's Woodson, man. Like, Woodson does that in the Philippines. Like, the whole compulsory English thing.
Yeah.
All my cousins grew up where, whether they, whatever school they went to, they get smacked on the hand or maybe the butt with a ruler from one of the nuns or whatever, if they spoke Tagalog or any non-English language in the classroom. I mean, that shit actually derives from, like, Woodson's influence. That's kind of fucked with me over the years. It's just thinking about Woodson as being a more complicated figure than I want him to be. Right? I want him to be a fucking this hero who wrote Miseducation of the Negro. It turns out he was actually like an actual colonizer.
Yeah.
And at the same time, he was, like, also all about a certain kind of, like, Black curricular, educational, intellectual self-determination and whatnot. You know what I mean? So
Black History Month is a kind of bourgeois project as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So. You said it. I don't know that I'd be able to.
Wrote a really, really good article in Sublation about the history of Black History Month.
Oh, right on. Yeah. So that's it. I mean, that's part of this history as well, right? Which is why, you're not going to catch me celebrating Philippine independence.
Wow.
It's just not going to happen. I don't think that's the independence I'd be celebrating. I think I'm looking at the ongoing struggles there that, oh, by the way, you were talking earlier in the show, at the beginning of the show, about Jason, about how the way folks have kind of talked to you about the Philippines, that like that you'd be welcome there as a Black man, and so forth, so on. It's kind of yes and no, right? Because there's a deep, there's a deep, U.S. When I say American, I don't mean American. It's a U.S. Fetish, right? Like, there's nothing more American in that kind of like nasty U.S. centric sense of American, not in the revolutionary sense of American, like the nasty U.S. sense of American. Like, there's few places that are more American in that sense than the urban centers, and in some interesting ways, like the rural areas of the Philippines, where you just see the kind of colonial cultural incursion, infiltration, and spread happening in some of the most fucked up ways, man. Like, some of my earliest memories of being in the Philippines, because our family used to go there every other summer and spend like a couple months there. Some of my earliest memories were just about trying to understand, like, why it was that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was on every soda cup. when we were there in like, I think it was the early mid 1980s, right? And I like, it didn't make sense at first, and then it gradually just became normal. I was like, oh, okay, this place is actually like this mirroring back of the United States and certain cultural icons and symbols, so if you want to think about the pervasiveness of that particular form of conquest, there's few places that are going to demonstrate that more clearly, more obviously, more overtly, more violently than the Philippines across its different geographies.
And I definitely want to, kind of going back to our earlier conversation on contemporary Philippines and nationalist leaders that take power in a very dictatorial form. Would you say it starts with Marcos, or do you say it starts before that? And and how does the U.S.'s role kind of affect this Philippine nationalism? Because I remember listening to speeches from Duterte.
Yeah.
When kind of around the time the New York Times article hits, if you remember that New York Times article that talks about all the extrajudicial killings that are going on.
Yeah.
I can't remember the journalist's name that was actually taking pictures of everything.
Yeah.
And Duterte spoke very negatively of the United States and their occupation role in the Philippines.
Yeah. So Duterte is who Trump wants to be.
I dig that.
You know what I mean? Like this is one of the instances. I mean, I was morbidly messing with people when Duterte rose to the presidency, and I was just saying, like, because it was right around the time that Trump was starting to get serious. Well, I'm serious is the wrong term. Trump's momentum toward the presidential campaign was like cresting, and I was saying, this Trump motherfucker is going to get elected. And it's going to be the first time in my memory that the Philippines is leading the United States as opposed to the other way around. And so Duterte, again, is a contradictory figure because on the one hand, he wins some hearts and minds with a kind of history of really strong positions, really challenging Philippine nationalism and supporting indigenous peoples' self-determination, right? On the one hand. And at the very same time, showing precisely the fulfillment of the trajectory that gets actualized in his presidency, which is kind of fascistic, authoritarian, kind of police state, anti-working class and anti-poor eliminationist tendencies, like pacification, neutralization tendencies. And of course, the ways in which his bravado articulates as a Philippine nationalism, it's largely performative because that motherfucker is not trying to bite the hand that feeds him either.
And let me ask you another question, because I see a lot of this rhetoric currently going on in a lot of discussions around crime. And I think there's a direct through line between the discussions around crime and what you were seeing in the Philippines with kind of an explosion of methamphetamines in very, very poor communities. And Duterte had the solution, and his solution was just, kill
them, kill everybody.
Yeah. Which is similar to the whole lock them up idea in the States, which is extremely prevalent, regardless of what people want to believe.
Yo, this is who Trump wants to be, is that dude. Trump wants to be him. I mean, this is, we started the show, like I had to talk about, I had to talk about this solidarity campaign, for Michael Amuchi. I mean, for Michael Amuchi. And this is exactly what we're talking about. I mean, this is how he gets caught up. Michael Amuchi gets caught up in exactly that. I mean, we should be celebrating the fact that Michael Amuchi has survived and like fought his incarceration. He's still alive. That's all we got to get him home.
Well,
but yeah.
Some of those stories that were coming out in like 2015, 2014, I think that New York Times article is about 2014, 2015, are frightening when you hear what they're doing. It's literally people like, hey, give me $20 and I'll tell you who the dope fiends are and who the drug users are. And the police and other people are just willy-nilly killing. I forget how many thousands of people died just that year alone from extrajudicial killings. And it was primarily poor people, because as people of status were getting caught with drugs, if they even went to trial at all, it was a very, 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 very different legal system that was going on there. That is going on there because Bong Bong, not much has changed on
Yeah.
the Bong Bong.
Yeah. So again, what we're talking about here, it's a neo-colonial mirroring of exactly what you see in the kind of the colonial center,
Mhm.
right, or the colonial geography. One could take the same words you just stated, and talk about Alameda Courthouse, or whatever, Riverside, Presley Detention Center. I mean, you could talk about Queens, like wherever you go, you could talk about whatever criminal court. You could go there, sit there. You could go sit there for a day in any criminal courtroom, and you could see exactly what you just said play out right in front of your eyes, like right inside the United States. But the article I think you're talking about was 2016, and the guy's name is Daniel Berehulak. I don't know how to pronounce his name. That had all those photos of the atrocities.
Yeah.
But like don't get it twisted though, that when I'm talking about Duterte is the guy Trump wants to be, I'm not just saying that. Like, I mean, think about Trump's.
I agree with everything you said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know you agree. I'm saying for folks out there that are hearing me, I mean, think about Trump's take. Like, if it was up to Trump, he would have executed the Central Park 5. I mean, he never backed away. He never
backed away.
He still hasn't. Right. So we're talking about the same kind of animus, which is why Duterte's then kind of performances, his kind of grandstanding of a certain kind of Philippine nationalism, which is both very much about his stranglehold over state power at the time, but is also articulated through his kind of rough and ready, working class background and upbringing. You know what I'm saying? Like that's what gives a certain kind of authenticity and appeal to so many people. Like I have close relatives who were like all about Duterte, not only in spite of, but because of what he was doing.
Did they feel as well that there was a problem with, I don't want to say crime because it's a little different in the Philippine context than the U.S.
People talk about it as crime.
Okay. But mostly we're talking about drug use.
People talk about,
yeah.
I mean, look, when I'm saying crime, like the way people talk about it, it's like this, right? Drug use is crime. It's like, it's not generally talked about as like a medical problem that requires, an infrastructure of care, right? And also probably an infrastructure of decriminalization so that people are not suffering more and dying when they don't need, preventable deaths and shit. So like, no, there's no, that's why, by the way, shout out to Abolición, the like, to my knowledge, the first archipelago wide and transnational organization of Philippines based abolitionists who are trying to push exactly that kind of conversation. Like I'm very grateful that they brought me into their community, I think it's been a couple years now. Oh, I'm gonna show you something. Hold on. I gotta show you this. Hold on.
He's excited.
He's not wearing pants, by the way. In all fairness, it's really warm where he lives.
Sure.
¿Cómo estás? Ninong ship?
You see that?
It's like you're the Godfather?
Abolición presented me this Ninong recognition, July 2022, so about a year ago. And I was like, "That's cool. I'll take Ninong as long as it's not Tito or Lolo. I'll take it."
I mean, your kids are older. You're coming closer to Lolo.
Hey, I'm not turning 50 this year. Okay, I'm not going to talk about that. We're not going to discuss that. We're not going to discuss this thing that's happening.
It is a reality that I am. Again, my oldest is here in the other room with me right now in Mexico, and it is a reality that I'm closer to Lolo. Paul, we probably call me that.
You're way more graceful about it than I am. I'm in like abrupt denial, and I'm like,
abrupt denial.
Well, when my daughter left home and like moved out, and she was the same age as me and her mom when she moved out, and I looked at her and her boyfriend, I said, "You guys are the same age as me and your mom when we had you." She just looked at me. She goes, "We ain't having no kids." But it's a reality that every time my phone rings, it's
No.
Is it just high? Oh, it's just high.
Your kid, wait, let me back up. Your kids call you?
Uh-huh. But mainly the little one that's 4 and the 24-year-old. The boys don't give a damn that I exist.
Yeah, no, my kids communicate when they need something like a ride for my daughter and money for my older son, my son.
No, I actually get how are you calls.
Look at you.
Because they know I ain't got shit. That's why.
That's the secret, huh?
Yeah.
You have nothing. Hey, you've got nothing but like bad spelling of people's names and charisma to be a host.
This is a call out.
And too much admiration for Mark Twain. You got that.
Jason believes no such thing is possible.
And like lack of respect for Malcolm X. Oh, killing me. You sound like John McWhorter and shit.
Wow. Wow. I'll remember that next time I'm around Coleman Hughes.
Next time.
You know I love you.
You know I was around Coleman Hughes once.
You thought he was handsome?
Yeah, had to be, right?
You said I told him he was handsome. No, he approached us in a dark alley in New York. Being totally serious.
Okay.
Were you there with us, Toussaint?
No, you better finish the story.
He came with a crew.
Where's the story going?
This time last year, we were in New York. We were doing a launch party for Sublation magazine, and Ben Burgess had a debate, and there was a bunch of people there that we effing hated. That dude Destiny was there. He sucked. Who's the guy that Ben got like almost in a fight with? What's the guy's name?
Oh, I don't know. He almost got into
James something. He runs that site. Project Veritas guy. You know what I'm talking about?
No.
Project Veritas, that guy. Anyway, that guy and the Tim Pool guy. They had tried to do some sly, sneaky shit to try to get Ben on camera saying some fucked up shit. And they had a black dude do it. And it was fucked up. And after the show, Coleman Hughes was actually offended by what happened. He didn't dig it. And so he found us. We were leaving. Ben does not do the whole, like, I'm going to leave out the back like you're supposed to. So he just walked through. He just walked through the audience. And people were actually pretty decent. But we were trying to find somewhere to eat, me, Ben, and Kuba. And we're walking around the corner. And then we turned around, and it was Coleman Hughes and his crew. And it was like West Side Story. And Coleman Hughes was like, he stepped out in front of his crew. I'm being totally serious. And he's like, so what happened exactly? And so he was just like, that's fucked up and that's not cool. And I don't like that gotcha shit. But he goes, I don't really agree with everything you say, but that was wrong. I thought that was funny. Just started laughing. All I could do was laugh because he is really short.
Is he?
Yeah, he's not a very tall man.
He's off the list then.
He was on the list.
Not really, no.
Yeah, he's you know, those guys all found a way to make a little bit of money. You know what I mean? They do their thing.
Interesting.
Yeah. But it is funny when people get outside of cameras, how they act. And to think that dude was like literally offended by the fact that the Project Veritas people were trying to do like this real fucked up gotcha journalism shit.
Yeah. That
I'm pretty sure, I feel very confident that Dylan Rodriguez would have punched that guy.
I would at least threaten it. I mean, I'm mostly all talk. But I could probably be pretty convincing that I'd fuck you up if I needed to be. You know what I mean?
You might have punched dude. You might have punched dude.
But that's their whole premise, though, isn't it? Like, isn't that their whole thing? That's what they're about. It's
and
like,
they never get punched though.
That's the problem. Yo, that's the problem with Jason. That's the problem to Madame Toussaint. That's the problem with academics too. Academics always like they say shit, and they say shit to you, and they assume that you're not going to make them pay for it.
Look at that.
I watched an interview. What's the British rapper's name? That's kind of, he hangs in academic circles now. Akala.
Oh yeah.
And he was getting interviewed by one of his hip hop homeboys, and he's like, "Man, how do you do it?" He was like, "You think I don't want to punch some of them people?" He goes, "I don't go on shows where I don't know what I'm talking about." And he goes, "They always want me to go on shows just to be there so they can make me look stupid, and I don't do that." And I thought that was kind of interesting. Like, it's okay to say I don't know, and I don't need to be on the show.
Yeah, you got to respect that, right? I mean, that's,
oh, dude, yeah, I respect the hell out of that, but I also understand that I don't have the ability to. I don't care. I'm not going to lose tenure. You know what I mean? I say enough dumb shit on this show that people get mad at me all the time, and I don't give a fuck if I punch somebody and someone wants to record it, and I don't give a fuck who they are. So,
you just made me think of something. Is that I'm pretty sure you wouldn't necessarily lose tenure if you decided to punch somebody in the mouth. I'm just talking hypothetically. Hypothetically,
it was pretty fucked up, man. You know, I think anytime somebody tries to do something like that and really embarrass you and sully your name and try to turn something you say around so evil, it's like, why are you trying to do that? Like, who do you think you are? Especially if that's not how I'm coming at you. So, do you want to fight? Like, that's kind of ultimately, I'm like, do you want to fight? Like, why are you acting like this? You're not going to talk like this to me, and I'm going to go, oh, okay, I understand what you're trying to say. Like, that's never going to happen. So, do you just want to fight me? Because we can fight. And then
I don't think they do, though.
They don't.
You know why? Because they don't want to suffer.
They don't want to lose too. Some people can get punched in the face and still win. Jim Rome, you're a sports guy. You remember when Jim?
Yeah, of course. No, he's still around.
Punched Jim Rome.
Oh yeah.
He got massively famous after he got punched in the nose. Geraldo Rivera.
He knew that shit was gonna. Yeah. Jim,
he instigated. What did Jim Everett say? I bet you won't call me Chris.
Yeah,
I bet you I will.
Yeah.
And he did it.
Yeah.
So you can punch some people in the face and you'll lose more. No one remembers Jim Everett's career. He goes to New Orleans after that. Doesn't really do much with the rest of his career. Jim Rome becomes literally the biggest name in sports talk radio. Literally.
You just made me think. I mean, to come to the topic once again of the show, Philippine independence stuff. You made me think of one of probably the most intense moment where I wanted to fight the whole room was in the Philippines, in a kind of like very docile institutional, university setting. And I don't know if I've told you this before on this show, but I was given a short lecture to a bunch of undergraduate students, right? The Philippine petty bourgeoisie. I was giving a lecture to them, and I was talking about the Mount Pinatubo volcano explosion. So I was talking about that, and I was talking about the way that the indigenous people of the area, the Aitas, who in the colonial anthropological parlance were and continue to be referred to in many places as the Negrito tribes. I was talking about their accounts, like some of the Aita tribes' accounts of the explosion. It's like, on the one hand, it made me really think about how there's a belief in the existence of evil, right? That there's actually evil. It's not just a kind of a cursory explanation for bad behavior. Like, there's a thing called evil that pervades the world. And then they were talking in particular about how they get talked about and treated by the straight hairs, right? Meaning the mestizos, like people like me. You know what I mean? So I was reading their quotes. I was reading the quotes from these Aita tribes people, folks, right, from the tribe, talking about like the forms of really, it was anti-Black kind of slurs and epithets and phrasing that the straight hair mestizos would talk. So I was reading their accounts, and the students started laughing. like every time I read one of the virulently racist and anti-black statements that Ita tribe folk would talk about as being, you know, part of the rhetorical violence that the mestizos would like inflict on them all the time. Every time I read one of the phrases, these students would start laughing. And it's one of the few times in that kind of setting that I didn't know what to do. You know, like they were all laughing. They're all laughing at like anti-black, anti-Aita humor and what it was enraging. I felt completely disempowered by it, like mostly because I didn't expect it. Like I didn't think it would be that open. The kind of and also because they didn't see it as anything other than jokes, kind of benign jokes. It wasn't seen as anything
demoralizing or demeaning to a whole people.
Man, yeah, it was deep. It was deep, but I wanted to make them suffer consequences over that, and obviously I couldn't. But yeah, that's one of the most toxic moments I've ever experienced in any kind of classroom. It was actually in the Philippines, and it was kind of inhabiting that moment of, it's probably also partly self-recognition that like I'm one of these motherfuckers.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it's partly that, but like just inhabiting that moment of this unacknowledged and unrecognized anti-blackness, and like deep racist animus, and have it just be kind of like normalized and funny and cause for giggling and laughter. That again is why I can't talk about Philippine independence, because that shit is as fucking American as apple pie in some ways. Now, and to respond to somebody put in the chat, now it wasn't because they thought that the statements were absurd. They were laughing because it was familiar to them. It was the shit that they would say. You know, to talk about the blackness and the kinky hairedness and the diminutive stature and whatnot of Aboriginal people, you know, up in the mountains and whatnot. You know, that's an inheritance of colonial genocide, straight up. That's an inheritance of fucking, you know, anti-black apartheid. Like that's how all that shit is still there. Mm-hmm. Which is to say it's everywhere. It's transnational. Shit is all over the place.
Well, his name is Dylan Rodriguez. He is a longtime friend of show. Predates Pascal Robert. Thank you, Dylan, for joining us. You guys got free champagne. You talked for an extra 22 minutes. We will be going into the champagne room for a little bit. I'm going to open up the phone lines. Mm-hmm. Do you guys want to talk? We should talk.
Can I just say,
no,
we did manage to raise a couple of bucks for Michael Amucci.
Beautiful.
Oh, hell yeah.
Thank you, everybody. I'm so grateful. Thank you.
Hell yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate you all.
And you spoke anyway. You said, can I say? And I said, no. And you spoke anyway.
I know. Getting out of my place.
Basically.
Also, can you introduce us to Bruno Mars?
I thought short meant that you had to cross him off the list. Bruno's like
he's like 5'6". Is he?
Yeah, that dude's got to be 5'2". Come on.
Is he that really?
Little? That dude's very short. No hate on short people, man. Like bring that Napoleonic with you. Claim that Napoleonic complex.
I saw Bruno Mars shut down an entire festival.
Of course he did.
I saw Bruno Mars. Do you know the group Thievery Corporation?
Mm-hmm.
Thievery Corporation played to probably like 400 people because they went on at the same time on the second stage. No one was there. Bruno Mars shut down Bottle Rock.
Well, I'll tell you this: my father's mother's maiden name is Mars, so I could be Filipino. Is like,
I don't know.
Kind of what he was implying.
Is that what you was doing when you straightened your hair? You was walking around New York talking about you was Filipino?
He said Bruno Mars was my cousin. That's what he said.
You had the silk press all up in the coffee.
Well, for most of the 90s, Filipinos claimed Jay-Z, so there's that.
Really?
I haven't heard it in a while. I but I remember in the 90s there was this whole like Filipino conspiracy theory that Jay-Z was like a quarter Filipino or something.
That's so funny.
I'm gonna roll with that story.
I love that
What,
story.
they said the nose. Is that why they said his nose?
It's the way it's his rap. It's his fucking skills. That's amazing. Yeah, shit.
Oh, okay. Had nothing to do with his physical makeup. I don't even want to do a Filipino accent. I'll just sound like Norm Finkelstein.
Oh, that's fucked up.
Jay-Z loves lumpia.
Oh my god.
I saw Jay-Z at a Jollibee.
At a Jollibee. Don't hate on Jollibee.
Do you know Jollibee?
I know of
You don't know
Jollibee.
Jollibee.
I know of Jollibee.
Goddamn Jollibee.
I have Asian friends.
No, you don't.
I do. And they're not all short. They're all different heights. All different heights.
Thank you guys so much for hanging out with us. We gave you guys an extra 25 minutes of champagne. We're going to go into the champagne room. I will put the link up. I lagged on that. So give me a second, guys. I'll put the link up for patrons.
Hey, as you do it, next time I come on, we're gonna talk. Me and Madame Tucson. We're gonna talk about how, like, I follow this other crowd that says Filipinos are actually not Asian. So okay, we'll leave that for next time.
Oh my
Right.
God.
Did they build the pyramids? This
Teaser.
is the question.
Oh,
Teaser.
I got into the biggest argument doing that to my son's mom, and there's a reason why I'm single.
Gotta get the numerology involved.
Oh man, I was
Here
like, "You're not
for it.
Pacific Islander." I'm sorry. So you know what? Let's have that debate in the champagne room.
Let's do it.
Sounds good.
Uh oh.
He's
I'm
ready.
gonna let's just test our skills, Toussaint, against a real live Filipino.
Oh, real life.
Real live.
A real live.
What
It's
does
a
that
real
mean?
Filipino. He loves the pancit. All
As
right.
long as there's no pork, you take the pork out. See, that's how I fuck up my Filipino-ness right there.
What kind of nation of Islam Filipino men are you? That's why you was getting mad at the school. You showed up there with a goddamn bow tie in a final call.
So you're saying I was asking for it, is what you're saying.
What were you wearing?
You were saying it's because of how I was dressed. You were saying it was my attitude
Yeah, I'm
and how I
saying
was
what
dressed.
you were wearing.
You were saying it was because of how I was acting. You're saying I deserved it, is what you're saying. You're saying I brought it on myself.
I said, were you in that provocative outfit?
That's what you're saying. You're saying I
You were
deserved it.
gallivanting. You were gallivanting.
He's so angry.
He's All right, we gotta go. We are out.